Welcome everybody to another Voice of Nick show. We're going to be doing more video editing and we're working on our next classic game review, which is Metal Gear 2. Let's get in it. Now, Metal Gear 2 came out in 1990, but what's really interesting is if you had a NES. Okay, NES versus MSX. Now, Metal Gear 2 came out in 1990, but what's really interesting is if you had a NES back in the day and you played a game called Metal Gear 2, it's actually a completely different game than the one that Kojima made. The story goes that when Metal Gear 1 came out, it was a big success. Konami wanted to make a sequel, and Kojima did not want to do it. So Konami made their own video game called Metal Gear 2 Snake's Revenge. And Kojima had actually no idea that this was even being created. It was completely without his knowledge or consent. And the story goes that he was on a train one day. He met one of his friends from Konami who was working on this secret Metal Gear 2 project. And then Kojima was like, what the hell? I want to make Metal Gear 2 if anyone's going to make it. And so he came up with his own idea for a Metal Gear 2 that he then pitched to Konami, and they allowed him to make in tandem to the other game called Snake's Revenge. So the real Metal Gear 2 is called Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake. That's the one we played on stream. That's the canon Metal Gear 2. There's also another entirely different video game for the NES called Metal Gear 2 Snake's Revenge, which not only is it's not a porting difference. It's literally has zero in common with the actual Metal Gear 2. It's just a different video game with no connection to the Metal Gear franchise other than the fact that Konami called it Metal Gear 2. So if you want to play the actual Metal Gear 2 that has, consequence on the plot of any of the other franchise games, you want to look for Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake. It is a pretty fascinating story. And when you hear that story, you usually would think like, oh, it's like Metal Gear 1 versus NES versus MSX. Like there's just porting differences. But yeah, it's like literally not a single character or story event pixel in common between the Kojima and the other one. It's sort of like Metal Gear Survive, like it's just a totally different game. The storyline in Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake is moving up to 1990. The storyline in Metal story. Moving up to 1990, the storyline in Metal Gear 2 is way more involved than it was in Metal Gear 1. We're gonna turn the gain down a little bit. It's a whole sort of like political intrigue, all sorts of scarcity of resources. Essentially, the world is in a crisis. There's like a resource crisis. Oil is running out. And this one scientist created like a synthetic substitute for oil called Oilix. And as soon as he creates this thing, announces it to the world, he gets kidnapped. He's brought to as soon as he creates this thing, he announces it to the world and he gets kidnapped. He's brought to this place called Zanzibar Land. And as it turns out, this is Big Boss, who somehow didn't die. Big Boss created this new complex called Zanzibar Land, brought him there, and is in tandem creating another Metal Gear. So he sort of has the world by the throat, not only in the threat department, but also in the economic department, because he can control the entire world economy essentially if he has control of this thing called Oilix. So of course Snake definitely going to need to get in there and do something about that. So Snake comes into Zanzibar Land to try and deal with matters. But as we keep going through the story, there are so many much more complicated. So we're going to make this its own thought here. I'm going to call it story complexity. But as we keep going through the story, there are so many much more complicated sort of storyline concepts going on. There are characters that are brought back from the other game who have different motivations now. There's a lot of shades of gray going on with these characters. It's not really just like get in there, save the people, get out, like it was in Metal Gear 1. There's a lot of kind of like really subtle things going on with characters changing motivations and not necessarily being good or bad. One of the really interesting concepts that kind of exemplifies this most is early on in the game you learn that the NATO bombing that took place at the end of Metal Gear 1, taking out the Outer Heaven complex, actually created a bunch of orphans, like a bunch of kids who lived in the area where Outer Heaven was, were now orphaned, and Big Boss took them in to, like, you know, his new Zanzibar land facility just because they had nowhere to go. So it kind of creates this really interesting, like, picture of Big Boss as not necessarily a completely bad guy, and also the government as not necessarily being that great, because they did all this to these innocent people. So, you know, out of the gate, Kojima is really interested in tackling some much more complex subject matter. Okay, we can really get a lot from a little with that. There was a couple parts where I sort of like retconned my own statement so that I could make it shorter, so we'll be able to cut down a lot of that stuff. For story, this time in Metal Gear 2 you have a way bigger support staff. Oh yeah. This time in Metal Gear 2 you have a way bigger support staff, what you can call people on the codec, who have much more individualized personalities, they have specialties, and they have way more dialogue lines. So, you know, every time there's something new that happened in the game, we could call them up and see, oh, does this person have an insight about this gun I got, or does this person have an insight about this thing I'm doing? There's a lot of like fun little secret things they can say. It really makes it a lot more kind of like consequential to use your codec. The big thing in Metal Gear 2 is that the stealth is way more involved. Oops, what did I just do? Oh, I did it again. The big thing in Metal Gear 2 is that the stealth is way more involved this time. That's kind of what you want if you're going to make a sequel to Metal Gear, is just like up the complexity of the stealth, make it even more involved. And that's totally what Kojima did. The first big change from Metal Gear 1 is that you can crouch. And that creates a whole new dynamic for this game. There are low walls you can go behind. There are things you can crawl inside of. There are all sorts of like tricks that will happen that require you to crouch. There's loud floors that require you to, you know, crawl on top of them or you'll make noise. There's all sorts of things that really change up the entire dynamic of the game by being allowed to crouch. And you know, that even that one, I don't know why I called it crouching. I should have called it crawling, but I don't know, whatever, it works. And you know, that even that one thing makes a huge difference. In addition to that, you also have the concept that guards can hear you. So in Metal Gear 1, the huge difference. In addition, okay, stealth, crawling, and we're gonna call this one stealth hearing. In addition to that, you also have the concept that guards can hear you. So in Metal Gear 1, there wasn't necessarily that much going on that would allow the guards to hear what you're doing. I believe if you shot a gun, they would know. But in this game, there are like different kinds of floors that will make noise. There's like, you can actually punch the walls and the guards will come running towards the area where the wall was punched. There's a lot more that you can do, not only that works against you, but like the wall punching and other types of like, you know, different ideas like that, you can also use this to your advantage. So this creates another whole new dynamic to the game. This whole complexity to the stealth, it just makes it a lot harder to sneak around. Difficulty. This whole complexity to the stealth, it just makes it a lot harder to sneak around. So you come into Metal Gear 2, you have to expect you're gonna be really dying pretty often. It took us a good 30 minutes to an hour before I wasn't just dying every 30 seconds to a minute. Like, I was dying very often in this game at the beginning because it really, like, you're not ready for it. You know, you're coming from Metal Gear 1, you think you know what you're doing, you don't. So be ready for a difficulty spike when you start it off, but once you kind of learn the mechanics, it's really, you just start to appreciate the genius of them. Okay. Another big change that influences the stealth in this game is that you have a radar that actually goes across. Oh yeah, radar is a big thing. Another big change that influences the stealth in this game is that you have a radar that actually goes across multiple screens. It shows 9 different screens worth of things, and what that means is that the radar not only shows the locations of guards on all of these 9 screens surrounding you, but it also means that the guards can patrol across all of these screens. So there's a huge patrol area the guards will go on, and they're, the guards are actually persistently patrolling through these. So in Metal Gear 1, when you switched to another screen, it would essentially reset and the guards would be patrolling from wherever they were when you last came on that screen. In this game, the guards will, they could be anywhere at any time, so you really have to keep an eye on where these guys are. There's a lot of moments where we would get tripped up by, guards coming in at the wrong time, or this guy's patrol is coming around here. You really have to pay a lot more attention like an actual secret agent, because of course not everyone's going to be in the perfect place at the right time you want them to be. So this really made it feel like the world wasn't just catered to us, which I think is a really a big difference between Metal Gear 1 and Metal Gear 2. The other thing that I think is a huge triumph in Metal Gear 2 is that they really focused on the bosses this. The other thing that I think is a huge triumph. These are all really good subjects, but I'm going to want to just completely wholesale remove a lot of them because we want to keep this to be around like 5 minutes, and it's currently, I think it's like 12 minutes worth of VO, so there's a lot that's going to get cut out. In Metal Gear 2 is that they really focused on the bosses this time. They have really interesting fights that not only are focused on the combat, but also turning it into more of like a puzzle. They utilize the multiple screens in the boss battles a lot to, try to force you to think outside the box. No pun intended, I guess. But they really want you to think in such a way that you're not just trying to shoot these guys, you're really trying to think about how can I use multiple weapons, how can I... Oh, this is when my computer monitor shut off. You're not just... Change the lighting. How can I... You're not just trying to shoot these guys, you're really trying to think about like, how can I use multiple weapons? How can I utilize everything I have in order to take these guys down? And there were a few pretty clever, like, boss concepts that really got me in this one. I think we're going to want to change the framing also. Put the eyes a little closer to the rule of thirds. This as opposed to this. Yeah. I'm too low in frame in that other one. Weapons, how can I... You're not just trying to shoot these guys, you're really trying to think about like, how can I use multiple weapons? That really got me in this one in order to take these guys down. And there were a few pretty clever, like, boss concepts that really got me in this one. Metal Gear 2 also throws you for a few loops. There are some things that... This, I believe, we will cut out, because it's almost like a spoiler. Metal Gear 2... Metal Gear 2 also throws you for a few loops. There are some things that require... I guess I'll say it out of the gate that there are a few things in Metal Gear 2 that actually require you to have the original packaging of the game, which, of course, if you almost certainly don't have the original packaging to this game if you're playing the remastered version, but you can find it online. I actually found a website that has like scans of all that stuff, so you can check that out. The instruction manual itself is pretty cool in itself. It's in Japanese because the MSX was a Japanese console. If you can't read Japanese, there's still plenty of cool things to find. You can see all the character portraits and stuff, and there's a lot of nice little story tidbits if you can read Japanese. We've been working on our Japanese language skills for a while, so that was kind of a treat to be able to go through some of that. An interesting note about Metal Gear... Oh. This, I believe, is character portraits. If you want to play Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, you can get this in the... If you want to play Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, you can get this in the HD collection or the... Nope, this is remasters. If you want to play Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, you can get this in the HD collection or the Legacy collection of Metal Gear Solid, which they put out on the PS3 and 360. They have remasters of these two versions of the game in there. And interesting about the remaster to Metal Gear 2 is that at this point, they actually redid some of the artwork. I'm curious if there's pictures of that. There has to be. Character portraits. Yeah, this is it. So the character portraits changed between versions. Oh god, this is going to be a great article. This website's always good, art of the title. In-game character portraits as seen in the original 1990 release top and the 2006 release included with Metal Gear Solid 3 Subsistence. So you can see that there's like, I guess there's two versions of Snake, one with a cigarette and one without. And this looks, I don't even know, maybe he's supposed to look like Rambo or something. But then down here you can see the remastered Snake, which has like the, you know, the style that was established by Yoji Shinkawa. And this is because obviously they're just trying to retcon it to look, you know, somewhat like we would recognize them as. And it's kind of a cool, we'll make our own graphic for this, but it's good that somebody has compiled a very cohesive image of it. He did some of the artwork in the remastered version to match more closely to what would come up in future franchise titles. So you'll notice in the remaster version that Snake and Campbell look very close, and Big Boss look very close to versions that we've seen. You'll notice in this version that Snake's character portrait look very close. Okay, yeah, so we want to switch that. You'll notice in this version that Snake's character portrait looks a lot different than he does on the cover of the game or in the opening cutscene. And then I switched this because in the remaster he also is changed in the opening cutscene. So I could actually just, notice this is completely redone, so I'll just cut that out. What we're doing right now, for anybody who hasn't been following along with this one yet, this is the first stage of editing in which we are just categorizing what every piece is. So I'm like naming what I talk about in that part, and then we take pieces of all of these. Once they're organized, we take pieces of them and put them into the actual cut, which has not yet been assembled. So you'll notice that I'm not actually removing breaths or, you know, cutting it together like an edited sequence, because that's not the stage we're at yet. You'll notice that in this game, when you're looking at Snake's character portrait, he actually looks very close. Did the audio change? It would essentially reset a new complex called Zanzibar Land. Why does it sound different? Brought him there and is in tandem creating another Metal Gear. So he sort of has the world by the throat, not only in the like threat department, but also in the economic department. I guess not. If you want to play Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, you can get this in... You'll notice that in this game, when you're looking in the HD collection or the Legacy collection of Metal Gear Solid, which they put out on the PS3 and 360, they have remasters of these two versions of the game in there. And interesting about the remaster to Metal Gear 2 is that at this point, they actually redid some of the art. Remaster to Metal Gear. And We're actually going to make this its own section because we can use that tidbit about where to get the game anywhere. We don't have to put that with this part. And you'll notice that in this game, when you're looking at Snake's character portrait, he actually looks very close to what he looks like, you know, the way that we know him from Metal Gear Solid and other things like that. That's because they actually went back in and changed the artwork to look like that. The original artwork, if you look it up, is totally different. But they kind of wanted to, I guess they just retconned it a little bit so that it's more understandable for people who are, you know, playing the game in the Metal Gear Solid generation. Metal Gear 2, though, highly recommended. This is, I feel like it's almost required playing for somebody who's a Metal Gear Solid fan at this point. This is where the series gets darker, it gets much more complex and meaty. The storyline really starts to matter. This is, I feel like, the moment in Metal Gear 2, I feel like this is the moment when Kojima truly becomes interested in making his game cinematic. I think it's when he was able to use the technology in such a way that he could make it cinematic. So there's a lot of movie influences. There's a big Terminator influence in particular in the opening, the amazing opening title sequence. And just really a lot of great story content for anybody who loves these, you know, this entire franchise. So Metal Gear 2, go check it out, guys. Highly recommended. I'll see you on the next one. Thank you for watching this classic game review of Metal Gear 2. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe on this YouTube channel. We have all sorts of classic game reviews as well as other behind the scenes of our channel. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye. Great. Okay, so this episode we have officially finished all of our organization. There's 14 minutes of raw footage to select from, which is going to be turned into, is going to be culled down very heavily and turned into roughly a 5 to 8 minute video. I think it'll probably be closer to 8 minutes with this one. But we got some work to do, guys. I'm excited. Now, if you want to see the channel on YouTube where we actually post these videos when we edit them, you can go on YouTube and search for Voice of Nick Vlogs. That's where you put all of our bespoke edited videos. I'll post a link to our newest one in the chat as well, so you can just go straight to it. There are 8 videos on that channel right now, the newest one being our Metal Gear 1 classic game review. Now we're moving on to this Metal Gear 2 one, so you'll be able to see this when it comes out, as well as the 8 videos that we already have on there if you subscribe to that channel. So make sure you do it. I'll see you guys on the next one. Thank you for watching the show, and bye-bye.